She stood in his doorway, voice barely above a whisper, saying, "My husband left me here, said you might need a maid." But when the rancher saw the bruises blooming on her skin, he didn't just offer her work, he offered her safety, and maybe something like hope. The sun was bleeding crimson across Wyoming when Maid stepped down from the dust-covered wagon. The driver didn't wait, snapping his reins and disappearing down the dirt road, leaving her standing alone before the sprawling Archer ranch. She clutched her carpetbag with white knuckles, staring at the weathered porch steps. The ranch house loomed bigger than any place she'd ever lived, windows glowing warm yellow in the gathering darkness. Somewhere cattle lowered softly, and the wind carried scents of hay and leather and something else, safety, maybe, though she'd forgotten what that felt like. Forcing herself up those creaking steps, her hand trembled as she raised it to knock. For a heartbeat, she almost turned around, almost ran back down that road on foot, bruises and all. But where would she go? The door swung open, revealing a man carved from the same rugged stone as the surrounding mountains. Boone Archer stood 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to block the doorframe and storm cloud eyes. His dark hair was mussed from work, and he held himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd never had to prove his strength. "Help you, miss?" His voice was gravelly, cautious. Maid's rehearsed words stuck in her throat. She could feel his eyes taking in her appearance, the way her dress hung loose on her too thin frame, the careful way she held herself. My husband dropped me off," she managed, voice barely above a whisper. "Said you might need a maid." Boone frowned, studying her face in the lamplight. He'd never put out word for household help. That's when he saw them fingerprint bruises on her upper arms, dark purple against pale skin. A yellowing mark on her cheekbone that makeup couldn't hide. Something in her eyes that made his jaw clench. "Your husband says when he'd be back?" Boone asked, though his gut already knew the answer. Maid's chin trembled. "Soon," she lied. Boone stepped back, opening the door wider. "Bunkhouse is out back. Clean sheets, wood stove. You can stay the night." If you believe every bruise tells a story, stick around, because Maid's is just beginning to unfold. Dawn painted the sky in gold and rose as Maid watched through the bunkhouse window. She'd barely slept, every creak making her heart race. But morning brought something unexpected: quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind that came before storms. The kitchen door stood open when she approached, smoke curling from the chimney. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." Boone's voice drifted out, rough with mourning but not unkind. She found him at the stove, still in yesterday's work clothes. The kitchen was clean but lived in, with mismatched dishes and a scarred table. It felt homey, nothing like the pristine, cold house she'd left behind. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the chipped ceramic mug. The coffee was strong and black, warming her from inside out. They stood in silence, neither sure what to say. Boone watched her over his cup, noting how she kept her back to the wall, eyes darting toward exits. The bruises looked worse in daylight, a ring around her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. His sister had looked the same way near the end. "Don't need to tell me your business," he said finally. "But if you're staying, you might as well make yourself useful." Relief flickered in Maid's eyes. She nodded quickly. "I can clean, cook. I'm not afraid of hard work." Without waiting for direction, she began clearing breakfast dishes. Her movements were quick, efficient, and practiced. Boone watched her flinch when a cabinet door slammed in the breeze. "Easy," he said softly, catching the door. "Hinges are loose." Maid froze at his proximity, every muscle rigid. The fear radiating off her made Boone step back carefully. "Sorry," she murmured. Nothing to be sorry for. He studied her profile, the way she tried to take up as little space as possible. "Your husband is coming back today?" The lie came automatically. "Should be. Soon." But Boone was watching her hands tremble as she washed dishes. He'd been reading books since he was old enough to play poker. Her husband wasn't coming back. The question was, did she know it? By midday, Maid had cleaned every surface twice. Boone found her behind the barn, staring at the old burn barrel where ash and charred paper scattered in the wind. "Something wrong?" he asked, approaching slowly. She pointed to something glinting in the ashes. "There's jewelry in there." Boone's jaw tightened. He'd forgotten about clearing out his sister's things 3 months ago. Reaching into the ashes, he pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished black but intact. The chain was broken. "Belonged to my sister Emma," he said quietly, wiping away soot. "She died 2 years ago." Calame's eyes widened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." "You weren't?" Boone studied the locket, remembering Emma's laugh. "She was running from a bad man too. Made it as far as Colorado before he caught up." The words hung between them like smoke. Calame wrapped her arms around herself, hands shaking. "What happened to him?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Nothing. Law said there wasn't enough evidence." He looked at the locket, then held it out. "Maybe you should have this. Emma always said it was meant to protect someone." Calame stared like it might bite her. "I couldn't. It's not mine." Emma would have wanted someone to have it. Someone who needed protecting. He pressed it into her palm. "Consider it a loan." That night, Boone cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table when he heard its soft sobbing from the bunkhouse. The sound cut through him like a blade, bringing back memories of Emma's last visit, her tears in this same kitchen. He walked to the window, seeing faint lamplight through bunkhouse curtains. The sobbing continued, muffled but heartbroken. Boone gripped the window frame hard enough to leave marks. He'd failed Emma, sent her away thinking distance would keep her safe. He'd been wrong about that. But maybe this time could be different. Boone picked up his rifle, checking the chamber. Tomorrow he'd ride into town, ask careful questions. Tonight, he'd make sure every door was locked. Emma's locket was gone from the ashes, and somehow that felt like a promise. Sheriff Greeley arrived just after noon, his bay gelding kicking up dust. Boone was mending fences, but could see Calame through the kitchen window, washing dishes with mechanical precision. "Afternoon, Boone," Greeley called, dismounting carefully. "Got a minute?" "Always got time for the law," Boone replied. But something in the sheriff's expression made his shoulders tense. They walked to the porch, away from the kitchen. Greeley removed his hat, running fingers through gray hair. "Had a visitor yesterday," the sheriff said without preamble. "Stranger asking about folks who might have come through recently. Specifically mentioned a skinny girl with a purple bruise." His eyes flicked toward the kitchen. "You wouldn't know anything about that?" Boone's hand moved instinctively toward his Colt. "A lot of people pass through. Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description." Both men knew it was a lie. But Greeley had been sheriff long enough to understand that sometimes truth wasn't the same as justice. "Figured as much," Greeley said carefully. "Told the fellow I'd keep an eye out. But you know how memory gets fuzzy when dealing with men who hurt women." He paused. "Of course, if someone was looking to lay low, this would be a good country for it. Appreciate the heads up. Just being neighborly. Oh, and Boone, that stranger mentioned he'd be staying at the hotel for a few days. Seems really determined." After the sheriff rode away, Boone stood on the porch watching dust settle. Through the window, he could see Calame had stopped washing dishes. She gripped the sink like it was the only thing keeping her upright. That evening, Boone moved his Winchester from the gun cabinet to under his bed. He checked loads twice, made sure extra ammunition was within reach. Then he walked through the house, testing every lock, checking every window. The bunkhouse door had a bolt inside, but the wood was old. A determined man could probably break it down. Boone made a mental note to replace it, assuming they had time. He was cleaning his Colt when he saw movement, Calame crossing to the bunkhouse, Emma's locket glinting at her throat. She moved quickly, checking over her shoulder before disappearing inside. A moment later, he heard the bolt slide home. Good girl, he thought. But locks only worked if the man trying to get in played by rules. 3 days passed without strangers, and Calame began breathing easier. Boone found excuses to keep her close feeding chickens, harvesting vegetables, reading weather signs in the sky. Storm coming, he said, pointing to dark clouds over western mountains. See how they're stacking? We'll have rain by evening. Calame followed his gaze, shading her eyes. She'd been working in the garden since sunrise, and there was dirt under her nails and color in her cheeks for the first time since arriving. Back home, we just waited for storms, she said quietly. Where was home? Boone asked, then immediately regretted it when her shoulders tensed. Kansas. Little town you wouldn't know. Nothing much there but wheat and... She trailed off, but Boone could fill in the blanks. They worked in comfortable silence, Calamay filling baskets while Boone repaired fence where rabbits had been getting through. "You're good with growing things," he observed, watching her gently tie up a drooping tomato plant. A small smile flickered across her face. "Had a garden once. Before." She caught herself, but the smile lingered. "I liked making things grow." After lunch, Boone introduced her to the horses. The Archer Ranch kept a small remuda, but one animal stood apart, a young bay colt with white markings that spooked at everything. "Nobody can get near him," Boone explained at the corral fence. "Found him running wild last spring. Probably been mistreated. Won't let anyone close enough to halter." Calamay watched the colt pace nervously, noting scars on his flanks and the way he kept his head low, ready to bolt. "He's scared. Scared and dangerous. Kicked 2 of my men." But Calamay was already climbing through the rails, moving slowly. Boone started to protest, then stopped when he saw the colt's reaction. Instead of bolting, the animal froze, ears forward, watching her approach. "Easy, boy," she murmured, extending one hand palm up. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The colt took a tentative step forward, then another. When he finally stretched his neck to sniff her hand, Boone felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Well, I'll be damned," he said quietly. Calamay looked back, and for the first time since arriving, her smile reached her eyes. He just needed someone who understood. That evening, as the promised storm rolled in, Boone sat on his porch watching the bunkhouse windows. He'd started calling her Cal in his head, though he hadn't said it aloud yet. It suited her better, less fragile, more like the woman who could gentle a wild horse with patience and understanding. Tuesday brought mail via old Pete Hannigan, who'd been riding the route for 15 years. Usually Boone got nothing but bills, so when Pete handed him an envelope addressed to CM in careful block letters, he felt a chill. "Strange one," Pete commented. "No return address, postmark from Cheyenne. Don't recall delivering for those initials before." Boone turned the envelope over. The paper was good quality, but the handwriting was deliberately disguised, careful lettering a man might use when he didn't want his natural hand recognized. He found Calamay in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with methodical rhythm. She looked up when he entered, flour dusting her hands, a loose strand falling across her face. For a moment, she looked almost normal, like a woman in her own kitchen. Then she saw the envelope, and all color drained from her face. "Mail," Boone said simply, holding it out. Calamay wiped her hands before taking the letter, fingers trembling as she recognized the initials. She stared at it for a long moment, turning it over just as Boone had done. "Thank you," she whispered, but made no move to open it. "Want some privacy?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I'll read it later." But later didn't come. Boone watched her carry the letter as she went about daily tasks, tucked in her apron pocket like a weight she couldn't set down. During lunch, he caught her taking it out and staring, her face pale. When she thought he wasn't looking, she'd press her hand against the pocket, feeling the outline through fabric. As evening approached, Calamay grew agitated. She dropped a plate clearing dinner, apologizing profusely as she swept up pieces. Her hands shook pouring coffee, and she jumped when a shutter banged. Boone found her after dark, sitting on the bunkhouse steps with the letter in her lap. She'd finally opened it, but the contents lay scattered around her feet like fallen leaves. In the lamplight, he could see tears on her cheeks. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. Calamay looked up, eyes reflecting flame. "He knows where I am," she said, voice barely a whisper. "He's coming." Without a word, she gathered the scattered papers and walked to the burn barrel. Boone followed at a distance, watching as she dropped the pieces into ashes and struck a match. Paper caught quickly, curling and blackening until nothing remained but smoke. "Feel better?" he asked. She nodded, but Boone could see it was a lie. Burning the letter hadn't changed what it said, hadn't made the threat less real. All it had done was remove evidence and maybe help her feel like she still had some control. "He won't find you here," Boone said, meaning it. Calamay looked at him in the dying firelight, Emma's locket catching the last embers. "You don't know him like I do. He doesn't give up." Ever. But Boone was already thinking about defensive positions, sight lines, escape routes. He'd learned about protecting what mattered during the war. Maybe not, he said. But he doesn't know me either. 3 days pass in a rhythm as natural as breathing. Callan's hands begin to heal, the angry redness fading to healthy pink. And with each passing hour she seems to unfold a little more, like a flower remembering how to reach toward sunlight. Bo shows her around his small ranch, the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, the pasture where his horses graze in lazy contentment. It's when they walk down to the creek to wash clothes that everything changes. The morning is peaceful, with clear water running over smooth stones and meadowlarks singing from fence posts. Callan kneels beside the creek with a basket of laundry, her movements more confident now that her hands are healing. Bo works upstream, checking the small fish traps he's set, both of them comfortable in the kind of easy silence that's become their natural language. The sound of approaching hooves drifts across the prairie, distant thunder that might be nothing more than wild horses moving to new grazing, but something in the rhythm sets off an alarm in both their minds. These aren't the random movements of animals. They're purposeful, directed, the sound of riders with a destination in mind. Callan's reaction is immediate and visceral. Her entire body goes rigid with terror so profound it's like watching someone die while still breathing. The wet laundry falls from her nerveless fingers as she scrambles backward from the creek, her face draining of all color. "Hide," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the babbling water. "Please, Bo, you have to hide, if he finds you with me." The riders pass without stopping, their destination somewhere beyond Bo's property, but the damage is done. Callan remains frozen by the creek bank, her whole body shaking like a leaf in a gale, her healing hands clenched into fists that split open her barely closed wounds. Bo approaches her the way he would a spooked horse, slowly, carefully, making sure she can see his every movement. "They're gone," he says softly. "Whoever it was, they're gone." But Callan is somewhere else entirely, lost in memories that have claws. He'll never stop looking. She whispers, tears streaming down her face. I hoped maybe I'd gotten far enough away, but he'll never stop. He thinks he owns me." The words hit Bo like a physical blow, and suddenly the precise nature of her injuries makes terrible sense. This isn't the story of an accident or even a random attack. This is the story of systematic cruelty, of someone who took pleasure in breaking another human being piece by piece. "Tell me," he says, settling beside her on the creek bank. "Tell me what you're running from." The story comes out in fragments, like pieces of broken glass that cut as they're pulled free. A man named Torrin Gage, who'd bought her from her desperate family like she was livestock. Months of captivity disguised as marriage, where her body wasn't her own and her will was systematically broken down until she forgot she'd ever had one. The night she'd finally fought back, clawing her way to freedom with nothing but determination and the stolen horse that had carried her this far. "He cut my hands," she says, staring down at the fresh blood seeping through her bandages. "When I tried to fight him off, said if I couldn't keep them to myself, maybe I didn't deserve to keep them at all." Morning comes slowly to the cabin, filtering through the windows like honey through cheesecloth. Bo wakes to the sound of muffled sobbing from the bedroom, not the sharp cry of physical pain, but the deeper, more devastating sound of a soul releasing grief it's carried too long. He lies still on the settee, giving Callan the privacy to break apart in whatever way she needs to, understanding instinctively that sometimes healing requires falling apart first. When she finally emerges, her eyes are red-rimmed but clearer somehow, like a storm that's passed through and left cleaner air in its wake. Bo has coffee ready, and breakfast, cooking eggs from his chickens, bacon from the smokehouse, biscuits that smell like comfort and warmth. "Let me check your hands," he says after they've eaten, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, not through fear, but through trust. This time, when he unwraps the bandages, Callan doesn't flinch away from his touch. The wounds look better in daylight, still serious, but not as angry as they'd appeared by firelight. Bo cleans them with gentle efficiency, applying fresh antiseptic and clean bandages, with the practiced care of someone who's tended injuries before. His hands are steady, calloused from years of ranch work, but surprisingly gentle. "You've done this before," Callan observes, watching the sure way he ties off the bandages. "Army medic," Bo explains simply. "Before I came here, learned that sometimes the difference between living and dying is having someone who knows how to patch you up properly." It's the first personal detail he's shared, and Callan latches onto it like a lifeline. "What brought you here? To this place, I mean." Bo is quiet for a long moment, finishing his work on her hands before answering. "Same thing that brought you, I imagine. The need to find somewhere safe to heal." He meets her eyes directly, and in them she sees the shadows of his own ghosts. Some wounds don't show on the outside. The admission creates a bridge between them, an understanding that they're both refugees from something, both seeking sanctuary in this remote cabin, where the outside world feels far away and manageable. For the first time since arriving, Callan allows herself to truly look around Bo's home, noticing the careful way everything is arranged. The books on the shelves, the guitar leaning against the wall, the small touches that speak of a man who's chosen solitude but hasn't given up on finding beauty in simple things. "Can I help?" she asks when Bo begins preparing to go outside for his morning chores. "I'm not much use with these." She holds up her bandaged hands. "But I can carry things, or—" "You can keep me company," Bo says, and the smile that crosses his face transforms it completely. "Haven't had anyone to talk to besides the horses in longer than I care to admit." As they work together through the morning, Bo doing the heavy lifting while Callan organizes tools and feeds chickens with careful one-handed movements, a comfortable rhythm develops between them. It's the beginning of partnership, though neither would call it that yet. May hit the kitchen floor like her strings had been cut. Boone caught her before her head could strike the planks, gathering her slight form while keeping one eye on the approaching rider. Through the window, he could see the man more clearly, tall and lean, sitting his horse with easy confidence. The black hat was indeed bent over his left eye, and even from a distance, there was something coldly predatory about how he surveyed the ranch buildings. Boone carried May to Emma's room and laid her gently on the bed, checking her pulse. The shock had overwhelmed her system, but she was stable, safe, for the moment. The hoofbeats stopped in the yard. "May," the voice that called out was smooth and cultured, the kind that probably charmed church ladies. "I know you're in there, sweetheart. Time to come home." Boone grabbed his rifle and moved to the front window, staying low. The stranger sat his horse 20 yards from the porch, close enough to talk but far enough to make a rifle shot challenging. He was older than expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and the kind of mustache that belonged in a photographer's studio. "Name's Clayton Thornton," the man called. "I'm looking for my wife. She's been sick, confused, might not even remember who she is." Boone said nothing, just watched and waited. In the bedroom, he could hear May stirring. "I know she's here," Thornton continued. "Seen her working in your garden, drawing water from your well. Poor girl's been through trauma, doesn't know what's real anymore." It was a good performance. The concerned husband seeking his troubled wife, worried about her mental state. Anyone listening would hear reasonableness, compassion, maybe even love. But Boone had seen the bruises. He'd watched May flinch at loud noises. He'd heard the terror in her voice. "She doesn't want to see you," Boone called back, showing himself at the window with his rifle visible. Thornton's facade cracked slightly, revealing something cold underneath. "And you are?" "The man telling you to get off my land." A laugh that held no humor. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, friend. That's my wife you're harboring. My property, legally speaking. Don't care about your papers." "Well, maybe you should." Thornton's voice hardened. "Keeping another man's wife against her will is a serious crime." Boone almost smiled. Greeley knew exactly what was happening here, and he'd made his position clear. "Your move," Boone said. Thornton studied the house, calculating options. Then he spurred his horse away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. But Boone knew he'd be back. Men like Thornton always came back, and they preferred the cover of darkness for their cruelest work. The real attack came just after midnight, not with thunder of hoofbeats or crash of breaking doors, but with the deadly quiet of a predator who who'd learned patience. The first sign was soft scraping of boots on the back porch, so faint only someone listening would have heard. Boone was ready, but Thornton was cleverer than expected, patient enough to test every entry point before committing. The kitchen window exploded inward in a shower of glass, followed by a smoking bundle of rags that Boone recognized too late as distraction. While he turned toward the noise, the back door burst open. Clayton Thornton stepped into the kitchen like he owned it, gun drawn and eyes scanning. He was exactly what May had described: distinguished, the kind of man who could charm strangers while planning their destruction. "There's my girl," Thornton said when May appeared in the hallway, rifle trembling in her hands. "Now put that down before you hurt yourself. You know you're not built for violence." "Maybe not," May replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But I'm built for surviving you." The gunfight was brief but vicious. Thornton tried to use May as a human shield, grabbing her from behind, but she'd learned from her mistakes. Instead of freezing, she drove her elbow back into his ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed. The moment he stumbled, Boone's rifle spoke twice. Clayton Thornton crumpled to the kitchen floor, his reign of terror finally ended. The silence following the gunshots was deafening. Smoke hung in the air, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with copper scent of blood. Clayton Thornton lay motionless on the kitchen floor. His reign of terror finally ended. May stood frozen, staring at the body of the man who had haunted her nightmares. Then her legs gave out, and she sank to her knees not from grief, but from overwhelming relief of finally being free. "Is he?" she whispered. "Dead," Boone confirmed, kicking Thornton's gun away. "Won't be hurting anyone anymore." Sheriff Greeley arrived within hours, drawn by gunshots that had echoed across the prairie. He examined the scene with thoroughness of a man who'd investigated plenty of violent deaths, noting the broken window, splintered door, evidence of forced entry. "Self-defense," the sheriff declared finally. "Clear-cut case. Man broke into your home, threatened violence, tried to use his wife as a human shield." He looked at May with something approaching respect. "You're free, ma'am. Legally and in every way that matters." After Thornton's body was removed and deputies finished their work, Boone and May found themselves alone in the damaged kitchen. The house felt different, lighter, as if a dark presence had been lifted from its walls. "What happens now?" May asked, touching Emma's locket where it hung at her throat, the silver-caught lamplight gleaming like a promise kept. "Whatever you want," Boone replied. "You're free to go anywhere, do anything. World's full of possibilities for a woman with your strength." May looked around the kitchen at bullet holes in walls, broken glass, overturned furniture that told the story of their desperate fight. But she also saw the coffee pot on the stove, clean dishes in the cupboard, small touches that had made this place feel like home. "Been thinking," she said slowly. "This ranch could use a permanent hand. Someone who knows the land, understands the animals. Someone who's not afraid of hard work." Boone felt something tight in his chest, loosen a knot of loneliness he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. "What kind of position are you interested in?" "Partner," May said without hesitation. "Equal share in everything. Work, profits, decisions. I'm done being anyone's property." "Equal partners," Boone repeated, testing the words. They felt right, like something he'd been looking for without knowing it. "I like the sound of that." 3 days later, as sunset painted the sky gold and crimson, they sat together on the porch steps. The bay colt that no one else could touch grazed peacefully in the corral, and smoke curled from the kitchen chimney. "You know," May said, "I never told you my real name. He always called me May, but that wasn't what my mother named me." "What was it?" "Caroline. But I think I like Cal better. Sounds like someone who can take care of herself." Boone nodded, understanding that names, like everything else, could be chosen rather than imposed. "Cal it is then, partner." She walked to the kitchen, returning with 2 cups of fresh coffee. As she handed one to Boone, their fingers touched briefly, a moment of connection that spoke of new beginnings and second chances. "Here's to building something better," Cal said, raising her cup. "To build something that lasts," Boone agreed. As stars came out overhead, they sat in comfortable silence. two broken people who'd found healing in each other's company. The ranch stretched around them in darkness, their ranch now, built on partnership instead of possession, on mutual respect instead of fear. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.